All right, we are live. Hello and welcome. Wherever you are in the world, it's an absolute honor for us to join you today. We're coming to you from all over the Asia Pacific. I was just saying to my group that I was lucky enough to join Space in London back in the good old days when we were in real life. But this is a brilliant format, and we're really looking forward to a great session today. My name is Pinazza. I'm coming to you from Sydney today, and we have an incredible topic supported by an incredible lineup. As you would have seen, our tribe is people-centric placemaking, and what we mean by that is from the private to the public realm, the curation of place is at the forefront of world-class projects. We know that the commercialisation of the experience is attempted by many, but succeeded by a few, although we may hear some more stories today. The Place Tribe at Space APAC will delve into the most successful examples of placemaking, and that's what we're really here to do. So I'll introduce you to our group, to our tribe today. We have Lee Lin from Asset World Corp Bangkok. We have Austin Chandrasekaran from Lendlease in Singapore. We have Shen Chiu from Investa also in Sydney. Yaying Lin, China Resource Lands in China. Thanks for joining us, Yaying. And Scott Stumbles of Mirvac, also in Sydney. Before we kick off, we're going to go for about an hour, and I'd encourage anyone to post any questions in the chat. We will keep an eye on the chat, and we'll pick up those comments as we go along, or at least we'll do our best. So enough of the intro. Let's launch into it, because I've been quite excited about this for some time. I hope you have been too. We're going to launch into a topic of placemaking versus place faking, and how to create authentic stories and emotional connection in places. And I think this is of course really important, because it provides the backdrop to everyone's everyday life. So I'm going to go to Yaying first. So Yaying, tell us about how to create authentic stories and emotional connection in places.
Yes, Drew. Maybe let me just start from just keep up a little bit of a few points on how to make a good placemaking. Actually, usually for a new township development projects, or we call it greenfield brownfield development projects, it's actually an end-to-end process from planning and design, construction and operation, and it involves collaboration from different disciplines and departments. Therefore, I think the role of the project owner, or you may call it a lead, will be very critical. So in the planning stage, usually what we do is it requires detailed analysis of the place in order to make the planning strategically and scientifically. So different methodology can be used. For example, we might use SWOT analysis. And through this process, you will analyze from different perspectives, such as resources, population, economics, government policies and culture, and etc. So we'll find the strengths and the weakness of that place. And from this process, you will figure out what we need to do to build and create the place, and whether it's realistic and to make it happen. And this will define the vision and the future of the place in 5, 10, or 30 years. And if the project is with larger scale, for example, more than 5 square meters, industrial planning and positioning will be required. This is to identify the industrial sectors in order to bring in the companies to locate in our projects, to create jobs, to bring people to work and boost the local economy. So based on the strategy planning and the industrial planning, the following step will be urban planning and design and construction, of course. In addition to the completion of the communication of the project management in the larger scale project, the operation capability of the project manager, or we call the asset owner, is also very critical to ensure whatever story we created at the very beginning is authentic in terms of leasing, activity creation, property management, and also IP creation. Yeah, over to you. Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Yaying. That's a great way to kick us off. I mean, certainly really getting under the skin of the place that we're about to tackle, and understanding the strengths and weaknesses, as you said, is a really important part. Maybe Lee, over to you. What did you think about what Yaying had to say? Maybe particularly on the strengths, weaknesses analysis, and maybe even rolling on to the operation and leasing side of things.
Absolutely. So a little bit of what we do. Obviously, here at NASA World Corporation in Thailand, we're quite diverse, and we're the largest hotel owners in Thailand, largest retail space owners in Thailand, as well as office. So we do a little bit of everything. So it's kind of I won't get into all the details, but in terms of placemaking, I think Yang touched on really good points about the context, of course, where you are. I think being contextual is what we do best at NASA World Corporation. We have to believe in all the spaces, all the cities that we go into all over Thailand. We're Thailand pure play, so we're looking at all the places we go into Thailand, and we extract the best out of it. To quote our CEO, I think one quote I'm really fond of is she talks about creating living creations. So that's what we do for all of our buildings. We actually look at these buildings as living creations. It breathes, has personality, it has its likes, it has its dislikes. We'd like to tell a story with the neighborhood, the people, the community, the culture, the history. So to us, that's very important. It's the success of all the projects. It's about the context. It's about the community and the people that we build around in. So that's one of our main focuses. Of course, everything else comes with the technical side of it comes with, but we like to start off with that.
Great, Lee. Thanks very much. Austin, maybe over to you. I think it's a natural sort of segue. I'm really interested in your take on it from a Singapore perspective.
Sure, thanks. And that's indeed a great segue, as you mentioned, Drew. The way we approach it is, and from my perspective also, it's really an understanding of cities. The cities tell a story, cities have personalities, and similarly, public spaces have personalities as well. And it's really trying to extract that personality. If you look at historic cities, what's happened over a period of time is we've destroyed the essence of some of those cities. The city walls, for example, some of the old piazzas, some of the old public squares have just disappeared because of the evolution of the new urban landscape. It has gone into shopping centers, it's converted into atriums, indoor air-conditioned malls, and the character that some of the old public spaces, such as the Agora or the Forum in the Rome or Teatro in some of these European cities, have just disappeared. Partly because we've sort of lost, in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, lost that understanding of the cities. Interestingly, the public, bring back the public space movement is going on around the world. There's not just a lot more focus from the governments, but also private developers to invest in that essence, in that personality of the public space. So what has happened is people have understood the cities a lot more better. They've appreciated the personality of the cities a lot more better and try to induce that in the public space. I really like your term, place faking. It's an interesting term. There are multiple interpretations to that. If you look at some of the modern cities in the world, they try to replicate cities in, let's say in Asian cities, trying to replicate what happened in Europe, replicating icons, replicating key landmarks. That really creates a poor form of public space that's not appreciated. Having said that, these cities evolve over a period of time. So modern cities, after 80, 100 years, start to have their own personality and identity. And then you can sort of understand the personality of that city and what kind of public space you want to introduce. So it's really, to extend that conversation, the emotive nature of public space, understanding the cities you operate in, understanding the cities you live in, and really trying to extract that personality and embed that into a public space.
Great, thanks, Austin. I think, yeah, I mean, being based in Sydney and also I know Scott and Shen also being based in Sydney, we've certainly seen a strong pivot to embracing public space, particularly given the context of the world over the past, 12 to 18 months. Scott, I wanted to come to you to unpack creating authentic stories. I mean, I'm obviously, being in Sydney, a bit more familiar with the local context here, but maybe talk us through how you guys go about creating authentic stories on the ground.
Yeah, I think for us, there's a couple of elements to that. There's understanding the existing site's context, and that's something that Lee touched on really well there. But then also giving a place room and a framework to be able to develop over a period of time, and not just taking a short-term mentality that what that place is at day one is what it's going to be for the next 100 years. It needs to have a chance to evolve and grow. As Austin said, like, you take a longer term view in a city. We as Mirvac are a long-term owner of assets as well as a developer. So whilst we may not hold an asset for 100 years, we do see a longer term view, and we try to ensure that the developments and places that we create have a framework there that will allow it to grow and evolve as the surrounding context also changes.
Yeah, I mean, your mention of a long-term hold, as you might know, I've come from a place, the Grosvenor Estate in London, who, you know, are the ultimate long-termists. They've held assets for 300 years and they're still standing and consistently evolving. And I know at the core of everything they do is placemaking, and like to think of themselves as, you know, one of the original pioneers of placemaking 300 years ago. So that was great great to hear that. Maybe Mirvac might get on a longer hold strategy in the future. Shen, what's your thoughts also from an Australian context, but around creating authentic stories and emotional connections?
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Everyone's pretty much covered most of you know, the important issues. I'd say that one of the things, you know, unless you're an architect and you studied urban design, placemaking is not something naturally that gets taught in an engineering degree, say, or a construction degree. And I came from an engineering sort of background. The word placemaking didn't exist when I started working, I'm sure, for a lot of us as well. Place washing is the other, like greenwashing. It's that term that people use to try and hit the trendy topic. You know, good urban design to us is very much about context and impact. You know, to do a good development, you've also got to get good sort of financial and outcomes to actually make it stack up. But all of those play in a holistic sort of, you know, feedback loop where you've actually have to deal with your end user, the community, and you need longevity of those places. Most of our last two developments were about 50 years old, and the buildings were fairly derelict. And so say we suggest that most buildings have a 50-year lifespan in the modern context, not the ones you're talking about in London and Grosvenor. Then if you've got 50 years, you still have a number of generations you have to deal with, a number of lease cycles, a number of uses. And so exactly as Scott has said, something that has a generational context. We're not building sandstone Gothic cathedrals anymore, but our buildings will circa have 50 years. And we have to consider all of their uses, the modern use of the new normal workplace, the retail ground plane, the broader community uses, the connection to streets and connection to transport, all of those things. And we try and keep those all in mind. I would be lying if I said we could put them all into a nice matrix and tick all the boxes on day one. Sometimes it just evolves as these things go.
Thanks, Shen. That was great. And I think just to probably wrap this topic up, we're 15 minutes in, and a great way to start the session today. For myself personally, how to create authentic stories and emotional connection. I mean, it should almost go without saying, but it's always about people. You know, I think Jan Gehl, the Danish architect, has a great order of thinking where he talks about first life, then space, and only then buildings. And what that means is human-centric design, understanding the needs, wants, and preferences of people, because each community is different. And only then can you think about creating space, a public space network, streets, squares, parks, gardens, plazas, whatever it may be. And then how do you start to frame up the buildings around that? And I think based on my experience and my experience with the Gehl team and different clients around the world, it's hard to go wrong when you put people at the center of what you're doing. So in saying that, might change gears a bit and talk about great placemaking examples, and maybe from where you're all sitting, but also where you've traveled. And it may be interesting to also hear, you know, some non-examples as well, where we've been to places and they may have missed the mark. I might, on this one, I might go to you, Lee, to kick us off.
Thanks, Drew. I like being the first always. So I'm currently on holiday too, just like Shen. I think Shen, you mentioned earlier, you're on holiday. I'm on holiday too. This is Thai New Year's, and I just like you, I clicked accept without knowing that it's our holidays, and our holidays do come by not so often. I'm actually calling you guys all from the lower bunk of a ship that we have created here for the Milia Hotel in Samui Island, and I would encourage all of you to come. This is not infomercial time for our company, but this is my third time being here. Once during construction, once during planning, and now here, you know, when it's fully opened, during the third wave of COVID hit. So, you know, still I see a full house here. Now that I'm out there and about, but I would encourage all you guys to be here. I'm in a lower bunk of a ship, and this is probably the smallest scale of space we're talking about here
Send
today.
us the tickets, Natalie. Send us the invite. We're there. We're there. As soon as it opens up COVID, we're there.
No problem. I'll talk to the GM. So it's under my care. I'll talk to the GM. I sent you guys the invites. But a gorgeous property. You know, it's super family friendly, and you know, I don't have a family yet, but just being here and being in the ship that's sent from the north, northern part of Thailand, is pure teak wood ship, and we turn these ships into boat suites. And there's these little boat suites, you know, nestled, you know, close to the ocean at a very quiet Chungmun Bay, north part of the island. So no, this to me is a perfect example, you know, for me to find different places to do this call, even within the boat itself. It's pretty amazing. So just the wonders, is the adventures that we try to bring. But personally, hopefully I'm not taking too much time, but personally through my travels, I've always been a big fan of Swire Properties developments. And you know, I lived in China for 5 years before moving back to Thailand. And whichever city I go in China, and I've always found the Swire team. You know, I don't work for them, so I'm not doing it. There's no advertisement here, but I think they do such a great job. You know, capturing the essence of the different cities, and you know, I think to me those are very successful places where I think to touch on what Scott said earlier, these spaces actually grow over time. It's, you know, when it first started, of course, it's got, you know, a few landmark buildings to capture some attention of the immediate crowd that would be drawn to the place. But I think over time, these developments turn into kind of the city's favorite, and kind of the hangout spot where to be seen. Instagram, WeChat moments, you know, TikTok now. That to me is such an amazing effect that Swire has done in different parts of China. If you haven't been there, I would encourage you guys to go. But to me, those are my favorite examples. Thanks, Drew.
No worries. Thank you. You've given me another tip. So what are we going to do now? Live spaces, buildings, ships. Is that what we're going to do?
Absolutely.
That was great. Scott, over to you. Some great placemaking examples that you know of, you've experienced or you've delivered.
Yeah, I guess the one that really sticks out for me, and I'm quite biased here, and this is something which is literally out the front door of our office, is Circular Quay in Sydney. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, because there's the Sydney Opera House, there's the Sydney Harbour Bridge, there's the Sydney Harbour. But there's this really interesting intersection of not only a really public interface, but a number of different uses. There's hotels, there's offices, there are residential apartments. There is a huge intersection of various different transit modes at that space. There's ferry stops, there's a rail station, light rail station, bus station. so there's this huge amount of activity that happens in this one location within this incredibly picturesque view. So it's something which I'm kind of lucky enough I get to see nearly every day when I walk past it. But it's really, for me, something that's really hard to go past, because there's all of these different layers to that. And it is really a public space. Like, it's Sydney-siders feel a real common ownership of that. It's not managed by one single entity. There is various different layers of government, various different layers of both private and government organisations that have a say in that place and how it's managed and curated. So there's this real feeling of ownership from Sydney-siders, and for many people, it's the first real welcome to Sydney is the first place most people go when they come to visit Sydney, and it's one of the first places I take people if they're visiting from somewhere else. For that reason, that it's got so much happening there in different ways, and it gives you a real sense of the broader city itself and the history of the city. It's got a really, Australia, we have thousands of years of Indigenous history, but also we also have a rich European history in the last 200 odd years that is really focused on that part of the city as well.
Drew, can I add something to Scott's story there? What's interesting about Circular Quay, I think, not being a Sydney-sider from birth, being from Melbourne, is the across the Circular Quay wharf is actually an overpass freeway. And interestingly, good design in Circular Quay in all those intersections of people, it was also ruined when they brought cars into the city, and they built something called the Car Expressway, which literally sits prominently as people come in from Circular Quay wharf into the city. And they've been talking about, I understand, for 50 years to try and remove that expressway. It's really hard to. There's train lines on it. There's also the cars. But interestingly, how easily you can make a decision at a certain time or point in time to deal with an issue like cars, and then suddenly you're stuck with a legacy item that ruins, arguably one of the most beautiful views and vistas in the world, with the Opera House, the bridge, and entering the city, but just a horizontal line of a car overpass.
I think we're all hopeful that one day that will become Sydney's version of the High Line as it's converted and pedestrianised, but I think we live in eternal optimism at this stage on that.
It was once said to me that do you think the Venetians would do that to San Marco Piazza? And I don't know. I'll leave it up to you to say whether they would or not, but they haven't. So that's great for the Venetians.
I think that's an important point, though, is that good places aren't necessarily perfect. They can have flaws and their own nuances that yes might detract from it, but they also give it character. If something is too perfect and too sterile, it actually loses its real character.
I think that's a really good point, Scott. I'd be, Austin, actually, to go to you now, interested to hear from you around great placemaking examples. I mean, Scott and Shen spoke about Circular Quay in Sydney, which is a real flagship pinch yourself moment to know that you are in the city. I know Singapore's got a few of those. Maybe you want to talk to some of those.
Yeah, I can sort of start by extending the conversation in Sydney. Streets of Barangaroo is one of Sydney's favorite destination in the recent past. We brought in some of the planners in Singapore as well to that, and the ability to transform a part of the city that nobody used to go to is amazing. And a key aspect of that, as what Shen mentioned, is the ground plane, and Scott mentioned is how you integrate that with the city. But in Singapore, some of the other examples, again, what we did in Paya Lebar Quarter is in the suburbs of Singapore. We had an opportunity to convert an undesirable piece of infrastructure into a great public space. So what we did was there was a canal or a big stormwater drain that was cutting through the site. We upgraded that canal, converted that into a public space by introducing a concrete deck on top of that, and gave back the public space back to the local community, and it has become a destination. And to Scott's point earlier, it's sort of what, and Shen's as well, traffic and keeping vehicles away from these spaces is the key. The moment of taking back the public space, a big impact that will be created is by taking vehicles away. But to add to the quality or the great quality of public spaces, actually the small things. Whether do you have enough public seating? Do you have enough gathering points? Do you have enough shade? Do you have enough lighting? Do you have enough accessibility for people with different needs? Sometimes we forget these simple things. We create public spaces for grandeur, for something that's good as a tourist destination, but not so much for the locals. Some of the other examples that do well, you have the High Line, the Granary Square. You spoke about Ian Gale, Drew. He's done a Gale score where he assesses public spaces from around the world, and Granary Square, High Line, so rate quite consistently high based on some of the methods that he's used. So it's some sense the very simple things that really add to the quality of the public space. It doesn't need a lot of investment.
Thanks, Austin. And we're going to circle back all the way to Yaying. If you'd like to tell us about some great examples in China.
Okay. Actually, those examples I'm going to share, some is located in Singapore.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I got a few examples that I can think of. For example, One North, which is an industrial estate. I think it's quite a very good mix, combined with research, education. In Seattle University, the campus is there, and US, and together with industrial and research buildings. And I think the place become a very dynamic and vibrancy, together with a lot of young people and PhDs and researchers working there. Although maybe in the nighttime, people left and go back to their home, but they still create many activities like bars and restaurants, so to keep the people to hang around even they finish their work. And the other good example I think is very good is the CBD. I think one of the examples is CBD creation, which is Marina Bay Financial Center, because I think despite those investment banks and world-class organizations bring in that location, it still create the dynamic and the spaces for to create a mixed use of office and activities, and also other like social activities to let the workers and the professionals to hang around. And the other one is Chongqing Chaotianmen. This is a Capitaland project located in Chongqing. The appearance looks pretty similar to Marina Bay Sands. It did become the local landmark and set a example as a mixed-use development plus transit-oriented development project in Chongqing. So the next one I'm going to share slightly more detail, which is the Guangzhou Knowledge City, which is a project I was in when I was working with Capitaland. Throughout the 12-year development, I think the area will become a very lively new township with 100K population and with very nice landscape. Asset classes, actually, I think those projects, the asset classes and the project type are very different. But one thing in common is that they all created the vibrancy, dynamic, and accessibility, and also the attractiveness, and especially its human-centric design to the place. So, for example, like Guangzhou Knowledge City, the project is around 30 kilometers away from the center of Guangzhou, and it was greenfield development. So I think the accessibility is one of the keys to attract people to live, work, and play there. So that's why we also talk to the government and also help the government to work together with the metro system and as well as the road system, and make it comprehensive to support that kind of population to live and work in that location. So I think in conclusion, like a good place, it needs many factors. So if we can do that slightly less costly, like create an activity to make it more dynamic or make it more accessible in a different way, but it will have the same effect. Yeah, over to you, Roy. Thank you.
Thanks, Ying. Yeah, lots of great examples there. And
Drew,
yeah,
just to open up for discussion, because I'm interested in everyone else's opinion, but I found Singapore quite challenging in the temperature and the humidity. And it was intriguing to me and I spent 1.5 years growing up in Singapore, that in some of those financial districts and areas that have been recently developed, as beautiful as Marina Bay Sands is, and if you watch a Grand Prix, you can't not go, wow. Very few pedestrians walk the street. Maybe it's too hot, it's too humid. There's a lot of underground walkways, overground walkways. And I always feel that there's something missing, having loved the European piazzas and areas that you can walk in with trees and sit outside, that people are being pushed underground, maybe because of the comfort levels. And I'm interested in Austin's thoughts as well, being from Singapore, that I'm challenged whether that's good placemaking or bad placemaking. Great buildings, great 24-hour retail kind of lifestyle, you know, all the way to 11 p.m. stuff that we wish we had in Australia, where people are actually transiting through into nodes of train stations to buildings to retail and areas. But as soon as you try and cross the street, it's not there. You're going underground, you're getting pushed away, and you don't see that movement of people, that porosity, of, you know, and that's a bit that I'm interested in other people's thoughts on that.
Sure, Shen, thanks. You know, it's a great point. It's something that, you know, we are trying to sort of grapple with as well, and trying to find solutions that will address the issue. You know, whether tropical heat and of course the thunderstorms are a big concern and consideration when we design public spaces. You know, interestingly, the current pandemic situation, you know, I call it one of the biggest social experiments in the world, has accelerated people actually trying to, you know, be comfortable in the public space no matter what, because of, you know, its relation or its nuances to safety, personal safety and health. And what we are finding now is people actually coming back more to the public space than they used to be before that. So we're trying to look at passive ways of trying to mitigate those measures. It'll never be 100%, Shen. You know, there's a lot more focus in trying to create privately owned public spaces that allows for more shelter, a big canopy on top of a public space so that can be used all weather. It's comfortable even under, you know, under rain or under sun. So Paya Quarter is a good example. Tanjung Pagar Center in the city center is a great example as well. So you can see these sort of urban initiatives or punctuations by the planning authority taking a lot of momentum as well. And what works well for Singapore, it's a green city. There's a lot more incentives. There's a lot more push to introduce greeneries, shade. So that's helped the utilization of the public spaces as well. You know, cycling never used to be a big thing in Singapore. In the last 5-10 years, it has accelerated, and like anywhere in the world, a lot more people are cycling now, despite the heat and the rain in Singapore. So you can sort of see this circumstance of the pandemic accelerating some of these response to the constraint that you mentioned. So it's fascinating to see, and I think it will only get better and it will evolve over a period of time.
yeah, thanks, Austin, and thanks, Shen, as well. I mean, that was a really good follow up. I've thought the same about Singapore, to be honest, and it was great to hear Austin's view on it. Maybe changing gears slightly again. So I think we've covered some of the what. What are some great places? What are the characteristics of those places? Why are they great places? Now I want to move into some indicators and metrics and measurements, and you know, really get to the core of it. What do investors want to see from a real estate perspective? Real estate as an asset class, real estate being a core component of places, of course. So I might start with Scott on this one. Maybe a little bit about Mirvac and the structuring behind it, and what you think investors want to see out of places, and whether, of course, financial value, but how strongly does social value, environmental value, cultural value feature, even now, now versus even 5, 10, 15 years ago, where we're at.
Yeah, I think when you take a longer term view, those things all are interrelated, and they add value to each other. If you're, as a developer or asset owner, you're taking a short term view, you might sacrifice some of those things to be able to get a shorter term short-term return, but it's a false economy, really, because it's the longer-term value that comes from good placemaking with a focus on getting people not only to a place, but for them to stay there and dwell, means that you have stickier tenants when you have an office building, you have higher occupancy rates for hotel, you have better sales rates for apartments, and better leasing rates for build to rent apartments. So all of those things feed into each other, which ultimately creates longer term value that's there, by providing the focus on ultimately providing a place that people want to be and want to stay at. And that I think there's been a progressive evolution for not only kind of businesses, but also the people on the streets, in terms of what their expectations are in various, a lot of different markets, particularly when it comes to environmental and social outcomes. And they're tending to gravitate towards asset owners and developers that really have a strong focus on that, and are looking to implement those frameworks into their places going forward. It's kind of an interesting one in terms of how you measure the value of those things. It's a bit easier to do it in a financial sense, particularly in retrospect. Like you can relatively easily compare the office rent that you'll get in one building that has some good placemaking initiatives in it, compared to another site that's down the road that doesn't. But where it's really hard is to quantify that at the front end stage, when you're either looking to acquire or develop a new place, whatever type of typology that is. It's really hard to how do you factor in, how do you quantify, and what is the financial implications of the good initiatives that you're looking to put in. And I think you really need to take the longer term view that your growth rates and your asset values at the end are going to outperform the broader market.
So do you, Scott, from where you sit, is triple bottom line, quadruple bottom line, whatever we want to call it, it's much more core business now. It's inherent to what you do on an everyday basis.
Certainly for us, for Mirvac, it is, and for most established, certainly corporate and institutional asset owners and developers in the Australian market, that's the case. It's where the concerns lie is you go further down in the market to the smaller operators and outside of the big institutional players, and there's not the reality is there's not the level of focus there that there should be. And where I think as an industry, there's a lot of us that are trying to take leadership positions to pull up everyone when it comes to those things. And part of that is leadership, and not only saying and advocating for these kind of changes, but also doing them and making sure that we embed them from day one into all of our projects and assets.
Yeah, great. Austin, what's your thinking over there in Singapore? Scott mentioning about the different tiers of players and promoters of places and precincts, and it not necessarily being equal across the board, in the triple bottom line, quadruple bottom line may not be standardized. Do you think you know, it really needs to come from within the organisation, or do you think government also has a role? What do you think around this particular topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone sort of has a role to play, the master developer, the authority, and the private developer as well. I completely agree with Scott. The benefits are sort of indirect benefits. You know, if you look at Granary Square as an example, you know, the multitude of public spaces, the new homes that were built, the ability for them to make in Granary Square, for example, the residential values around that were much higher than in central London. So that, as an example, is a testament of how we can measure indirect benefits. So this is a cross collaboration with, you know, state authorities, the master developer, and private developer as well. Using, you know, Paya Lebar Quarter in Singapore as an example, it's located somewhere in between the city and the airport, and we still manage to attract tenants that are traditionally in the city core or in a city. So they were willing to move the headquarters from the city center to a suburban location, thanks to the investments that we made in place, in the quality of the place, and placemaking. What I find is a lot of the private players, they want to invest in good quality assets. It's a bit like your home. You put so much passion and emotions into it, and you'll spend a lot of money to make it a best place, and it'll be a long-term view. So we do find that happening as a trend. Investments in place, quality plays. At PLQ, we're able to, as I said, attract the best international tenants and local tenants as well. Our residential sales did well as compared to the neighbors or in similar locations within the island. And also we were able to get some tenants, retail tenants, food and beverage operators that again want to be along parks, along waterfronts. They were willing to come to Paya Lebar Quarter as a suburban location. So that was a testament. And again, what we see now, you know, you might have heard this literature of the 10-minute city, the 15-minute city, the 20-minute city, and every sort of mixed-use development, every precinct wants to have that attribute. And all developers, authorities want to invest in that notion. And there's a lot more push to provide that level of amenity and public space and placemaking as well, so that it becomes a sustainable long-term precinct. You know, it's no longer about individual buildings, but also what value it adds around the precinct. So yeah, so just taking what Scott mentioned and completely agreeing with that point.
Thanks, Austin. And yeah, Ying, I'm interested from your perspective in China, measuring value and triple bottom line, financial, social, cultural, environmental value in the different places you see?
Well, actually, there's no standard measurement system to quantify how good the area is, has been developed. But I think there are a few factors or a few perspectives that can be taken into consideration. Because my previous project, majority are that either greenfield or brownfield projects. So for my perspective, I think the first of all we need to consider is the infrastructure, how good the infrastructure has been constructed. Is a comprehensive infrastructure system that would consist of 7 systems, which is electricity, water, transportation, drainage system, telecommunication, gas, heating system. And if it's in the north, it will require that heating system. So in this part is how reliable the system is it maintaining well? Because this is the foundation of the project. And secondly, some of the macro analysis, like for example, the population, GDP, and the income tax, the company tax, those factors can be considered. And in this angle, it's more like what government thinking is. So usually, for example, in China, government may have that special zone operating this management organization. So they will manage and monitor how good this region is performing through those factors. And thirdly, I think this is back to the foundation and the financial analysis as a real estate as a classes, like for operating properties such as hospitality, commercial, retail, or other niche asset classes like logistics, data center. I think each asset classes it have its own way to identify how good it is the performances financially as well as operationally. So I think in terms of that asset value, I agree with Scott that we'll go back to the financial discipline and monitor it in the asset management point of view. And the final prospect it might be able to like taken into consideration is the short-term factor that what Austin share, like for example, how many talents has been attracted to this place and how dynamic this place is, how many activities or how many people would like to go back to this location, even during the off office that after work during the weekends, and how many people come here to go to work. I think this it can be measured by different ways. Like for example, the communication, like how many people go to the location during different hours. Yeah. So yeah, thank you. Thanks, Drew.
Thank you. I always find it amazing that we're all working in the same discipline across the world in different countries, and somehow we're trying to judge our places against the comparable criteria. Lead, what's your thoughts on this? I mean, diverse indicators and measuring success for you guys over there.
Sure, thank you, and thanks for everyone's input. I work in a very special role as a World Corporation. I work directly with a chief investment officer who apparently has a doctor's degree in financial engineering. I don't know how to spell that, right? I'm an architect by trade. I'm a classically trained architect, so we're trained to create places that are wonderful, useful, and good for everyone to use. Good for the city, good for the human beings, really. So but under my team, I do have to look after different disciplines of business development, which is finance, financial modeling, feasibility. I look after the architects, interior designers that are concept designers. I look after urban planners. I look after the whole shebang. So I would say right from the beginning, it's like Scott said, a lot of times it's very hard to measure the success of your project till maybe 4 years, 5 years, maybe 10 years after. And sometimes you do have to allow it to grow also to see how successful it is at the end of the day. But I think we start from the very beginning. We have to make sure it is successful, that from the way we plan it. I think when you measure it afterwards, I think in a way it's a lot of aftermath. But what we like to do is really think about the project from so many different ways. Obviously with data, but in a way, data doesn't reflect so much of what's going to happen in the future. Nobody knows that this pandemic will hit so hard and continues to hit. So what we like to encourage our team to do is to continue to live in the present as futurists. I encourage my team to really live in the future, to think in the future, to think really hard about what are the needs, what are the unserved needs of the customers in the future, of the people in the future, what the city needs in the future. So, and with that, we measure our projects with different metrics. But what we want to do at the end of the day is really create landmarks. Like Scott said earlier, for as a World Corporation, we 90% of our projects are freehold. So we like to keep our assets for as long as possible. As the company's mostly still owned by one family. So they like to keep the assets and to be performing for successfully as far as possible into the foreseeable future. So so a lot of these factors come into from day one, even within the team, from the planning stage, so that we know it's almost guaranteed success, in my opinion. So if we're able to look into all these factors from the very beginning, and ensure, another very important part that we like to talk about is partnership. So we never do all these projects without partners. So for us, our partners are very, very important to us. How we work with them, how we maintain a very long and mutually complementary partnership is very, very important to us. So with that, we have a very good recipe to develop very good projects that will continue to grow and evolve and continue to be successful. Thanks, Drew.
Thanks, Lee. I love if I if I interpreted you correctly, I love that you're an architect sitting under the chief investment officer.
I am. It's a lovely role.
The best advice I got when I jumped ship from architecture into development was put down the pens and pick up the calculator. And that was a good
From
start.
AutoCAD to Excel. AutoCAD to Excel is what it is. Yeah.
Exactly. That was a good start. Shen, over to you on this topic around metrics, indicators, measuring success or failure. Yeah.
Yeah, look, again, when you come last, everyone covers all the good topics. I just have to say I agree with everyone else. The triple bottom line is becoming more and more prevalent. You mentioned government. Government has a huge role to play. If you look at the sustainability drive in Australia at least, and probably across the world, until the government mandates it, there's just too much of a gap between the big end of town and small end of town. Big end of town, we're looking for punchy rents, say, and if you want punchy rents, you need to deliver the best. So it's not hard to try and deliver to the triple bottom line because you have to. We're talking about institutional investments with pension money that we're talking about holding this forever. So we can invest and put real money into it. But then you go to the small end of town, they're looking to flip properties. It's private money. They're looking at B, C, D grade buildings. So why would they invest in this? They have to have a personal belief that that's going to give them something. And it's very difficult. You know, we have to be completely honest that when money sits there as a key driver to even instigate a project, why would you spend it unless you can get the return? So the government has a huge role to play in it. We have to have that. Scott's right, we have to lead. And we lead by giving clear examples of implementation to show when the others say, well, it can't be done and it's too expensive, that we can say it can be done and this is how you do it. And we can bring the bigger end of the contractor market to understand the supply market, how we can do it. And then the smaller end can start getting there. So we have to play that part in the big end of town. In terms of social, we've always had to deal with amenities and now it's health. And that hasn't changed. So really fancy end of trip facilities, say a really beautiful lobby. These sort of quality issues drive social decisions. You know, the chase for talent, again, for larger corporations looking to lease our buildings. So if they're looking for that, how do we give their people a sense of belonging, a place, somewhere that they feel integrated, somewhere where there's a community, all of those sorts of things we've always done. And we're just starting to call that the social behavioral part. And then the sustainability part, as I mentioned, it is really where the governments have to really push. But we're starting to see green debt. So we were one of the first cabs off the rank to actually get green debt at a reduced rate because the banks also have investors who have ESG sort of drivers, and that then drives the ability to, people are willing to take a little bit of a haircut on their returns because they're seeing a greater good that they have to give back to the community. And again, you can get that at the bigger end of town, but maybe not at the smaller end of town. So again, sort of these things start filtering through the use of renewables, some of the savings that can be done, some of the proof points from intelligent buildings and data collection to show operational efficiencies. You have to invest it at the big end of town to show it can be done. You show there is a payback loop, and then the smaller end of town will get there. Or government can dive in and just mandate it, which they're starting to do in Australia. Not sure around the world, but definitely in Australia, they're starting to put some key sort of metrics in place around performance, around expectations on performance of buildings. And then, you know, this social experiment that Lee mentioned with the pandemic, you know, one of our buildings, we've picked up some really interesting data points. And it probably is only because we had both before and after data points that we were able to see why people were coming back and what they were using. When they came back, where were they going? What were they using? What were the drivers? Were they getting engaged in using the building app to actually understand what was happening, notifications? How many workflow requests were being asked for? How many people were catching the lifts to which floors, access control, those sorts of things. And we're just really getting to the bottom of that now to understand those. So we can feed that back into the, I guess, the feasibility of the business case use to push it up to the investors to explain to them, look, these are clear metrics that we've actually established in one of our buildings to show who has actually, you know, and what has actually mattered and how we can do that. Otherwise, we're stuck with the whole, you know, oh, my building is better than that building because I've got a gold and they've got a silver, so it must be better. That's kind of a little bit, that's a little bit binary, isn't it? That's a little bit too easy.
I think one thing to touch on there that Shen kind of alluded to is the prevalence or focus that the big end of town would have on social and environmental credentials. I think a big part of that is driven by the fact that the customers for us at the bigger end of town expect that. So big corporate tenants in office buildings, the level of sophistication and expectation is much higher than some of those smaller occupiers that might be in the B and C grade buildings. So I think that one other area, as well as the kind of carrot and stick approach that government can take, another way that can really help is improving the overall level of education of smaller companies and also the general population in terms of the benefits that come from having a focus on those elements, rather than purely, what is your rent or how much are you buying an apartment for.
That's brilliant. And I've just looked at the time and realised that we're almost bang on the hour. And I'm thinking, do I do a quick fire, go around the room and pass it on? If we fast forward to 2030, we're going to have to be really quick with this. Fast forward to 2030, what is the key characteristic that a placemaking organisation is going to need to prosper? And I'm going to say one word, and then I'm going to throw it to someone, and then you throw it to someone, and then we loop back, and then we'll wrap it up. So my word is creativity, and I'm going to jump to Shen.
Well, that's not fair. You left me last on all the other ones. It's a bit cliched, people-centric. I'll take that before anyone else does.
Lee.
Sure, you took my word, but creativity, it was definitely on my mind right when you asked that question, but I would say diversity. I think that's another word that I would use. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, one word.
Well, I think there are many keywords, but in this case, I think sustainability.
Very good. Yeah. Great. Scott.
I'd say engaging. There's places that you're able to interact with and that you get to engage with it. It's really the exciting part.
Excellent. Thank you. And Austin.
Thanks, Joe. I'll go where I started, personality.
Brilliant. What a way to wrap up a fascinating hour. And I think for each of our organisations, we'll look out for those keywords on our 2030 vision statements, and we'll be able to pin it back to this forum. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Thank you to the audience as well. I think it's been a fascinating discussion, and yeah, long may we look after great places. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Drew. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.